Hello and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm Kevin Castley. I'm your host here. Thank you for tuning in. Well, isn't this kind of awkward? So I had discussed with the Politicrat about 40 minutes to 50 minutes ago that, I was streaming tonight, of course, as I always do, and he had asked if he could come on. And I said, well, I was, of course, already scheduled to be streaming about Dogecoin. But because we didn't get to do a premiere today, because StreamYard screwed me over, I was going to be doing a second premiere. So he wanted to talk about Russia. So I said, sure, come on, we'll talk about Russia. We'll do 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. He might show up still. I'm hoping he shows up still. I'm just not sure where he is. I reached out to him on Twitter. But if for some reason he doesn't show up, I'll retitle the video later on. But I will speak on Russia. Oh, actually, there he is. There he is. Welcome, Politicrat. Okay, we're wondering where you are. So, okay, wonderful. I'll remove this and we'll get into the actual chat. How's it going tonight? And thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. You hear me all right?
I can hear you fine. Yes.
Oh well, I was just working on a video for my channel. But yeah, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here. So what have you been talking about so far, or did we just go live?
Well, we went live about a minute ago. I streamed earlier this evening about Dogecoin and the hype around Doge.
Okay.
Are you into cryptos?
Not. I mean, I know a little bit. I wish I would have invested in Bitcoin back when it was still possible to get money doing that.
Yeah, that's everybody.
Yeah, no, I mean, I invest in stocks sometimes. Like, okay, here's something funny. So, so you know me, you and I definitely differ a lot on foreign policy. So you're going to think this is kind of based. So I don't like to call myself a libertarian, but I basically am in that camp. Yet at the same time, I invest in defense contractors. I have stocks in Raytheon, Lockheed, all those guys.
Oh, interesting. Well, okay. I guess that brings me to a question, which is that I don't necessarily think that that's incompatible with what mainstream libertarianism is, because mainstream libertarians, they oppose government expenditures on the military. They don't actually necessarily oppose the contractors themselves, to my understanding, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's more or less we don't like the idea of the government, of like a government monopsony or the quote unquote military industrial complex.
Why?
But no, in terms of like the precedent of the government having a monopsony on that. However, at the same time, I support it. Like, if that's going to be the case, 100% it needs to be private, because like a centrally planned military apparatus would be absolute horseshit. Plus, it's inefficient anyway.
Wait, no, it's not. Machiavelli talked about how in times of peace, the mercenaries will command a premium for their service. Yet when the war breaks out, they will either run for the hills or they will take a higher contract from a rival state that happens to invade you. And this is one of the reasons why I'm staunchly opposed to anything other than a monopsony in the defense industry, because who else could it be? It has to be the government contracting out these companies, as opposed to what? Is the U.S. military going to be rivaled by a domestic private force?
No, here's the thing. I 100% agree with you. It's kind of like between a rock and a hard place. It's like, hey, that's what we have. We really can't have anything else, because like that, it's like best case scenario. It's the best case scenario.
Yeah.
Like, I don't
understand the resistance to what people call the military-industrial complex. What about the military-industrial complex is bad? Because it seems that the military-industrial complex is the best way to combine the innovation of the private sector with the patriotism and the loyalty and the unity of one nation, one state. And not allowing for, say, mercenaries and whatnot to undermine the national interest.
Hey, all I know is that the companies I invest in, Raytheon, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, SAIC, they can't fail. Whenever they take a hit. Oh, Boeing too. Like, for instance, when Boeing ended up taking a hit, there was like that thing. Was it the 737? there was some controversy. This was about a year. So stocks plummeted. I just bought a bunch of stocks in Boeing. Then they went back up within a couple of weeks. It's like, yeah, no, like those companies are never going to, they're not going anywhere. So, I mean, it's pretty much a done deal. Your money's safe with the military industrial complex. So I'm not.
Well,
I'm not
but there
complaining.
is competition within the MIC though, because it's not like every company gets guaranteed contracts. They have to
Oh yeah,
compete
no.
for who has the best product. Like where I would have a problem with it is if it was one corporation that always got the contracts from the government and it was just one big corporation, one big government. But if it's a bunch of private companies competing for government contracts, I don't actually see any issue with it. I think that this is the perfect system, basically.
Yeah, and that's the thing though. Well, in terms of like the framework and model, 100%. But in terms of like this is what bothers me about and you see it actually more among people on the left, like the shoe on head grift left, more than you do even in libertarians. However, you see it in a lot of libertarians too. But like, yeah, okay, I understand. There's like definitely criticisms about the quote unquote military industrial complex, but at the same time, basically the way they are describing it when they try to talk about what the military industrial they're very reductive with how they explain it. They make it sound like it's like this one like single apparatus, like where there's like two companies that are competing for it, when that is not the case at all. Like my father was a defense contractor, and now he is, I won't say the company, but he's actually the CEO of a of a somewhat prominent like defense contractor in the DC area. So I mean that's basically what all these are. So yeah, I mean I've grown up around this. Like I see what the business model is like. I just think that it's very reductive, just how people who again libertarians, and to a greater extent people on the left who are like military industrial complex, any business that that produces technology for government equals bad, equals bombing brown children in Iraq. Yeah.
So I have a question then. What's your reluctance to support the military industrial complex? Because you mentioned in the earlier part of the stream that you were opposed to it, if I recall correctly.
Oh no, I said I'm not. I never said I'm necessarily opposed to it. I said there's definitely fair criticisms to be had of the model, but that's like it is with all things.
Like, I don't even think there are many good criticisms out there. Like I said, I don't see any way that you could do it in any better format. I mean, even the Soviet Union, even the communists over there, they had separate corporate entities that competed for contracts. Essentially, you'd have Tupolev and Antonov and Mikhail Gurevich competing for Kremlin funds. Even they understood that the military-industrial complex model was the best way to combine state directives with individual innovation.
Oh, yeah, no, I actually do. Yeah, that is something I do agree with. But the thing is, like, you do have certain companies that have to meet quotas for weapons specifically. And yeah, I'm definitely for weapons production. I mean, I think anybody who would oppose producing weapons would be a complete dumbass. Yeah. But at the same time, we have such a surplus of those because these companies have to make these quotas. Whereas I feel like we could be investing, like the military industrial complex instead, we could be investing more of those funds into developing like more satellites and surveillance technology, something along the lines of GeoScout, which was a contract for about, I think it was about 15 years ago. I think it was it's either MITRE or SAIC, I don't know, but it was like put on by one of those, and it was more or less for innovating like satellite technology. And it's like, but then again, that also brings me back. I think when people hear when they're thinking of defense contractors, they immediately jump to Tony Stark weapons production, bombs, and it's like, no, that's only really a small part of it. However, they're the ones who are making the quotas and are developing like this surplus, like they're getting most of the funds, but at the same time, that's only a small percentage.
Well,
yeah.
To what extent is there really a surplus? Because I haven't really seen much on there being any sort of missile surplus, for example, in the United States. I mean, I know, for example, that oftentimes if you have to do any sort of like operation as far as like firing off missiles or whatever, say it's Syria or Iran or something like that.
Yeah.
Even just to replenish those on site is definitely limited. Based on what I've seen, I don't think that the U.S. has in its current inventory the ability to wage warfare, say, for 3 months without having to produce more weapons. So, and if your factories are down or whatever, for whatever reason, it's generally better to have more than less, would be my view of it. So, and definitely better to have a lot more than your rivals combined. So that's my standpoint on that. And in fact, it's actually really good for the U.S. economy too. I mean, the military-industrial complex is a huge stimulator of the economy of literally every state in the U.S. It's not just California or just Washington State or just Massachusetts. It's every single state, the way that it's been designed. And that's one aspect of it that I like, is that it's not a complete sort of we just do it wherever it's necessarily cheapest to do. It's done so that it creates jobs in every state. So
yeah, that's exactly where I just wish that people on my side just could view these things with more nuance. For example, I feel like my main problem with like libertarian folks, and again, I consider myself, I would call myself a classical liberal, or actually a national liberal. I avoid the term libertarian because I differ for them significantly in a lot of regards.
Well, some would argue that classical libertarianism, if we're talking like Adam Smith type, and national liberalism are not necessarily 100% congruent.
Well, national liberalism would be someone like John Stuart Mill. So like sort of like the mid 19th century Liberal Party in the UK, which eventually merged with the Whigs and the Tories, and they became the modern Conservative Party. But yeah, no. So I mean, that's basically probably the best label I put on myself. But either way, but what I can't stand about a lot of people on my own side is like they are too obnoxiously principled. They cannot see the nuance. They cannot see that there are always exceptions to certain rules. You have to make exceptions to your principles sometimes, because
their principles are dumb. No, like their principles are dumb. Like
I think they, for instance, it's like, okay, I can get behind scaling back certain troop presence, or at least doing something like base reallocation or closure and realignment.
In this,
I know. You and I disagree with. However, at the same time,
we're in 2 Cold Wars. It's worse than it was the last.
Hold on. However, at the same time, they don't want to do that. They want to pull every single troop out of like absolutely everyone. That is fucking stupid. It's like, no, we can't just do that. Like it's far too complicated of a situation to go just say, okay, bring the boys back home. Let's bring them back. We're good. Pack it up. Everything's going to be so peaceful. It's like, no, if that happens, China is going to fill that vacuum, because nature abhors a vacuum.
Yeah, Russia.
And the thing is, a US led world is like because you pretty much have 2 choices, or I mean, you would argue Russia, but like let's say 3 choices: Russia, China, the United States. One of them, while not perfect, none of them are perfect. The United States definitely is not perfect, but it sure as hell beats a world hegemony of the other 2.
Yeah, it's not even close. Like the US is basically like 95% perfect, and the others are basically zeros. So like the US needs a few little tweaks to make it better. The others are like,
I think you and I would probably disagree on what the tweaks are, but I agree with you I agree with you on principle in this.
Yeah, I did want to say, just before we get into the actual substance on Russia, one of the things that I like about the way that the U.S. military-industrial complex works is that because factories are purposefully distributed in such a way that it's not necessarily the most economically efficient, but it's politically good, in that they're throughout the country, so that if anybody tries to close anything with the military, it's going to mean that you're going to lose jobs in each senator and each congressperson's state. So it reifies the system that's in place. And I like that, because a country that loses the will to maintain its military infrastructure and defense spending will be buried because its enemies will seize upon that. And I like how it's got that redundancy built into it. Whereas if it was all in California, for example, or like say all the factories that the contracts went to were like in California and Massachusetts, well, if those two states get senators and stuff that are like, oh, we don't like the military, but like we want this stuff here because they're jobs. Other states, like say you've got progressives from Minnesota, they can be like, we're against the military and there are no jobs in my state, so I've got no penalty whatsoever. You could actually overturn the defense spending, and it would be a shit show. Whereas if all 50 states have production, then every single congressperson, every single senator is going to get hurt jobs-wise by voting against approving military expenditure in the budget. So that's one of the reasons why I like it, is that it's got that redundancy and that bulletproofness built into it to maintain the security apparatus and preserve our civilization.
Yeah, I definitely recommend. I mean, if it's your type of thing, read the book. Oh God, I forget who it was by, but it was a book called. There's multiple books by this title, but Arsenal of Democracy. It was about FDR and the government contracts during the Second World War, including ones given to Henry Ford, and it was basically about the growth. It was basically about the growth of Detroit and sort of how that played into military production during the Second World War. And what a lot of people just don't realize is that the New Deal did not get us out of the Great Depression. It was the fucking war economy. Like, I don't know why that whole New Deal myth is still.
Well, it was the war economy. I mean, a lot of people make a similar sort of myth about syndicalism, how it created the middle class. It's like, not really. It was
I'd say
it was savings rates that got people out of poverty. There's a reason why the boomers, as we think of them, tend to be thrifty and tend to have like, but they also have sports cars and stuff. It's because like,
are you a thrifty boomer?
What's that?
Are you a thrifty boomer?
I'm pretty thrifty. Yeah, I'm pretty thrifty, and I'm definitely a boomer. So yeah, but I didn't
boomer.
Yeah, I didn't live through the Great Depression or anything. But those that did, they had really high rates of saving. Whereas now we have really high rates of debt, and so people complain and say, "Oh, well, back then they had a strong middle class or whatever, and now we don't. I wonder why." It's like, well, they used to save money back then, and now we have negative savings rates, so it's kind of a problem. But there is that. We should move into Russia, though.
Okay.
So on the topic of Russia, I consider Russia to be at the moment, apart from North Korea, which is the most imminent and serious threat posed to the United States, I consider Russia to be the most dangerous of the great powers that oppose the United States. So
I would agree to an extent, at least in the short term. However, actually, the theory I was about to postulate with you from this book that I was telling you about actually would argue that Russia is the biggest long-term threat for reasons that are kind of complicated, that aren't really discussed these days. But either way, I would personally argue that it is China in the long term, Russia in the long term, like the long term of the long term. But then,
so are we talking 500 years or 1,000 years or
like 300 to 500?
Okay.
But so I mean, if this theory is correct, which I'll get into in a couple of minutes, but in the long term, in terms of the next century, China, I would say. However, I'd also argue that China is probably going to collapse before the US too. So, I mean, but the thing is about Russia right now, the current iteration of Russia, what you call fascist Russia, what I call neo-Tsarist Russia or pseudo-Tsarist Russia.
It's not Tsarist. I mean, there are so many elements of the state apparatus of fascist Russia today that far more characterize what we would associate with, say, for example, even to an extent, the Third Reich and whatnot, than in any way it would what Nicholas had or what.
Honestly, I don't think you could really pinpoint any particular ideology onto modern Russia. It just is. It just does whatever it can. It's just like a disparate mix of all these different. It's like a Frankenstein's monster. It's not led by ideology. Whereas China, I would argue. I don't want to get into a conversation about this right now, but I would argue that China is more fascist than Russia. At least, like ideologically, China is 100% communist. That is their that is their belief system.
Well, at least we can agree on that.
At least in practice, it is fascist.
At least we can goddamn agree on that, because I'm so sick of brainlets trying to tell me, oh no, actually China's capitalist. It's like,
no,
oh yeah, because capitalist countries take your place from you even though you paid off your mortgage after 99 years, and capitalist countries forbid literally any free company doing their own thing that goes outside the government's will and the leader's will. Oh yeah, no, they're totally capitalist, bro. They're totally capitalist, bro. That's why the government controls literally everything. It's like,
yeah, capital. I don't even like the term capitalist because it's such a nebulous term. It means so many different things to different people. To someone, it just might mean market economy in general. To someone, it might be like free market liberalism. To some people, it might mean like anything that isn't socialism. To other, it's just, yeah, I'm not going to get into it. But we also need to remember that, and this is often when like you have like quote unquote capitalists or just people non-leftists, let's say non-leftists, and pretty much every single non-leftist supports capitalism to an extent, with the exception of fascists, but there aren't many fascists around these days, at least in the economic sense. But
wait, did you say every non-leftist supports capitalism?
Because no, I said almost. I said almost.
Okay, because you got reactionaries, you've got obviously you've got like the more anarchist type people and stuff like that, monarchist type people, feudalists, a lot of different.
Honestly, a lot of the monarchist people are like a weird sort of ANCAP. So like therefore like it's weird. Like I think it's I don't buy into it. It's interesting, but I don't buy into it. They basically say that like countries should be like the private property of a single person, and then they'll have a free market within it, but they're basically the king. And it's like, okay, you're basically like saying privatized monarchy. But so, I mean, I guess you can make that accept. But yeah, no, I know some. Like for instance, you know Outremer, right? Like, yeah. Like,
well, I've spoken to him a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, I know you. Yeah, I know you guys don't talk a lot. I mean, we're still planning on going through with that continued dialogue between you, and that's something I'm looking forward to. But either way, so for instance, he's pretty far right on like social cultural issues. He's not like of course not racist at all, but so he like rejects like all the alt-right bullshit. But then at the same time, in terms of economics, he said he definitely leans more towards sort of left-wing populist economics, like in the sense of like, for instance, what was interesting is I forget if it was him, but they were talking about Bernie Sanders, just saying he was making it. So, I mean, I think it was somebody in the group that we were in, because I know him in real life. One of them was saying that they were considering voting for Bernie Sanders because he was arguing that all of these policies would be good for families. And I remember Tucker Carlson was making that same argument too with regards to Elizabeth Warren. I know we're really going off topic here, but back to Russia, what I jokingly like to call neo-czarist Russia, what you call fascist Russia. I really don't. I think both of those terms don't really fit them in the end. But I mean, but anyway. So I think that it is dangerous in the short term. More dangerous in that it is a wounded beast, and there's nothing more dangerous than a wounded beast. However, it's going to die anyway within a number of decades. So, and that sort of gets into what I wanted to discuss tonight. But either way, it's basically, I mean, Russia's been a state in decline since the 70s. And Vladimir Putin, I mean, definitely not a good dude. However, he's pretty much, the way I see it, the only one who's keeping the entire system from collapsing. Because the thing is, Putin can't see a Russia without Putin, basically. I mean, there's really no long-term plan.
Yeah,
It's
there's no
really,
long-term plan. If he had a long-term plan and wanted to actually solidify his legacy for posterity, he'd have one of his daughters appointed as the supreme successor, but he won't. He refuses to because he doesn't care what happens to him after he dies, the same way that Joseph Stalin didn't either. They're nihilists. I mean, for all this talk of Putin being a born-again Christian, it's bullshit. The dude's an athist to the core,
I thought he was
but
an,
the
I thought
nihilistic type of atheist. So.
born again. Russia doesn't have. He's not. I thought that he was Eastern Orthodox because I know his confessor is the patriarch of the Russian Church.
Well, yeah, I use that in more of a colloquial sense. Like he went from atheist to becoming Christian or whatever. I guess you
he's whatever suits. He's whatever suits him.
You think of born again specifically as being like a branch of evangelical Protestantism. I just mean that as like somebody who becomes like, basically converts to Christianity. No, he's not actually Christian. Like, can we both agree on that at least? Like, there's no way he's not a Christian.
So I don't know him, so I'm not going to say either way. But if he is a Christian, he's not a good Christian.
Well, yeah, but I mean, just everything that he does, he has no plan for anything after his demise. Like there's no way he believes that he's going to have any consciousness after he passes away. Everything is just about the accumulation of money right now, and all he does is splurge and purge. That's all he does.
Yeah,
it's like there's no tomorrow.
I mean, I would say I will give him this. He is very competent.
Oh, he's more intelligent than any Western leader. And that's why it's a massive problem, because he has willpower that allows him to get wins despite being incredibly weak compared to us. Because our leaders are pathetically embarrassing from Germany to the UK to the US to Canada. It's a joke to France. So
I mean, like if Putin was like pro-Western and liberal, he'd probably be my favorite world leader. I'm just going to straight up say that.
Well, he would have been purged. He wouldn't have survived.
Right? But
yeah.
But either way, so yeah, wounded beast, Russia, and I remember. So I've been, I remember back in an IR class a few years ago. I was taking. I've told you about this professor before. He actually is in like the same. I don't know if I don't want to call it a society. I forget what it was, but it was like some sort of group, foreign policy group, club or something. But same group with John Bolton.
Oh, okay.
And so he and John Bolton, I mean, they're not like friends or anything, but they've chatted like about ideas and stuff. John Bolton, of course, is sort of like neocon adjacent. Won't call him a neocon because technically that's not true, but neocon adjacent. Yeah,
he's an offensive realist.
Yeah, neocon adjacent. And then so he and my professor were both realists. The only difference is my professor's more of sort of like an offshore balancer type, but not like an isolationist. But it's sort of a weird kind of Machiavellian offshore. He was a fun guy, but either way. So I remember I did my final presentation for that class was arguing how Russia is actually an empire on the rise. However, in hindsight, after doing even more, like I got an A on that. And I made like a decent argument, and apparently I had fantastic analysis, and that was where the strength was. But in hindsight, I think I was 100% wrong, especially after talking to multiple Russian immigrants, especially came from the USSR, who came from modern Russia. What's funny is I've noticed a lot of Russian immigrants tend to be libertarians, including my old boss, who's surprise, surprise, favorite author's Ayn Rand. but either way.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I went through what Ayn Rand did, I'd probably would have come to her conclusions too. Who knows?
At least on economics, yeah.
I mean, seriously, you grow up under communism. How are you not going to come out a libertarian? I mean,
no, exactly. That's my that's my prediction, or that's my theory. And then you see it all the time too when people coming from Venezuela and Cuba. Yeah. Like, why do you think like the Cubans, they mostly vote Republican? It's because I think they know the Democrats aren't socialists and stuff. But the thing is, the Democrats, there are no socialist elements in the GOP. but there are
Yeah.
some socialist elements in the Democrats. So for them,
Well,
it's
it's
like
not
better
just
be
that.
safe than sorry.
It's not just that. It's that the Democrats want to placate and play patty cakes with the Castro regime and the communists in Cuba, whereas the Republicans at least entertain the possibility of liberating the country, or at least historically they did. I think that in general, you do tend to see that where when people are on the inside and see how things really work, they tend to be the hardest opponents of that once they come around. Like you see that with neocons. Neocons started off on the left, and then they became the most vocal advocates of American capitalism and freedom after, because because they saw what the actual left was like, and there's a reason why
they basically took the Trotsky. But what's interesting is the one thing they kept was the Trotskyist foreign policy.
No,
because to them that was the useful part. It's interesting.
But no, they haven't, because that's like saying that Alexander the Great was a Trotskyist. It doesn't mean anything. War is a part of human nature. Like you can't. I know.
I'm just talking about I'm talking about the specific philosophical maxims, and then
They don't. Like once the world is a global federation of democracies, there's no point at any point anymore to continue the warfare. Like it more is in the spirit of Kant than it is Trotsky in that sense.
Or even Hegel. Definitely that whole.
I mean,
there's definitely sort of. I feel like there's sort of a very.
But like I see this all the time. Like I'm in libertarian groups and stuff on Facebook, and I'll post videos to make them angry and stuff from my channel, and they'll often say things like, you're no different than Hitler, or you're no different than Trotsky, and all this because you want to do war too. And I'm like, oh, by that definition, some guys who went to war over some animal carcass from 52,000 years ago, they were Trotskyists and Nazis because they did war, they did violence. It's like, no, we're humans. It's in our nature to do war and violence. The question is, what's our ideology? I mean, war doesn't make you a Nazi. What matters is what are you fighting for? War is either good or bad. It depends on what you're fighting for. So.
Yeah, I mean it's exactly. I mean, there's a. I remember. Did you end up seeing that video I shared with you? The one, is world peace possible? It was pretty depressing, but the entire.
No, I don't believe so.
No, the entire. Well, I sent you a video. The entire is like, is world peace possible? In order to answer that question, all we need to do is look back at history. Basically, history never ends. She merely finds new ways of retelling the same story.
I disagree with that. I totally disagree with that. Like if America had nuked the USSR in 1948 and proceeded to declare that any other countries that ever seek to get nuclear weapons will be wiped off the map, and then sought about expanding our influence and consolidating power, within 50 years, the world would basically be either one country or a federation under American hegemony for the rest of the time. And that would eventually collapse. Like all organisms eventually die, and we need to remember that. Because it would be a democratic system of prosperity and wealth. And if you watch CGP Gray's video, for example, the rules for rulers, that valley in which revolutions happen isn't in rich, wealthy democracies where the penalty if you lose, like with the insurrectionists, for example, at the Capitol building, what did they face? Well, they faced either they win, they get power, and that's cool, and then they get to be swaggy and they have Trump in power again and everything. But if they lose, they're going to jail or they die, and the chances that they win are less than 1/1,000,000%, and the chances that they lose are basically guaranteed. Nobody does that in a strong democratic system with strong institutions. There's no reason to. The reason why they do that in the third world, for example, is because if you win and you might have a chance at winning, then your kids get education and you get luxuries. Whereas here, we've got enough luxuries and enough education that there's no real point to ever do a coup in America. It's just I'm not saying there'd be a coup, because I doubt there would be a coup if there were a one world democracy. I'm saying the institutions would naturally erode. They'd very similar to how when we get older, our bones are going to start to get weaker. No, democracy is constantly revitalized, though. That's what makes democracy so great. Is that
I've only seen. So I'm not anti-democracy by any means. Just want to say that up front. I believe in like in a republic with democratic institutions. However, I have noticed, and I guess this is kind of a bit of a black pill, so to speak, but I've just seen democracy is a very suicidal thing. I wish that weren't the case, but I have yet to see a single historian, and who knows, maybe history will prove me wrong, but I've yet to see a single, and when I see democracy in a loose sense, just anything from classical democracy to Roman republicanism to modern day liberal democracy to ramshackle democracy set up in the third world. However, then again, for the third world, you could argue that like a democracy only works if in developed countries, which is a valid argument. It goes back to the whole Why Nations Fail book, good book. I'd definitely recommend that, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. But I've just seen, I have yet to see a democracy in history that has, or any government in history for that matter, that has lasted forever.
But they didn't have the world, though. That's the difference. Like, because I would speculate that if Operation Unthinkable went through and the U.S. maintained a strong will to consolidate power and oppose any potential rivals, that for the next 800,000 years, if you came back after 800,000 years, it would still be America. It wouldn't be America. It'd be the United States, but it would be a world system, you know? Like, it would just last because who would be there to oppose it?
Yeah.
Perhaps, like, it hasn't been tried before. Like, because I would argue that, you know, as far as world domination is concerned, it almost was impossible to do before the advent of nuclear weapons. It's actually kind of easy to do it right now. Like, if America had 40,000 nukes and the rest of the world had 4,000, and it would be fairly doable, actually. I mean, America would win a war with the world right now.
No, exactly. No, if America went to war against the entire world, the United States would win.
So, you know, the U.S. would win. And you might say, well, what about Russia's nukes? Russia's nukes, even if they got all of them off the ground and none of them were intercepted, guess what? The U.S. has more targets than they have nukes. America would keep fighting. They'd be wiped off the map. So,
regarding Russia, though, really their only source of strength at the moment is their military. They have the second largest military in the world behind the United States.
Well, their army's not that big. It's big, but
well, mostly in terms of their artillery, their arsenal.
Yeah. What's impressive about Russia isn't even their navy. Their navy's weaker than
Italy. No, they have like less than what, 200 ships.
Yeah, no, they're old and outdated, and it's a joke, and their flagship is a meme. It's the case. Their navy is weaker than Italy, and Italy is the fourth biggest in NATO. And of course, we know that the biggest in NATO, for example, consider the fact that the largest air force in the world, you can probably guess what the largest air force in the world is, right?
I'm guessing it's Liechtenstein.
No. So yeah, it's the United States Air Force. But guess which country? Guess which has the second largest air force in the world?
Which one?
The United States Navy.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that for a second? I spaced out for a moment.
Okay.
I was looking at the comments.
So the largest air force in the world is the United States Air Force. The second largest air force in the world is the aviation component of the United States Navy. Russia's not even close. Russia has a lot of planes. The U.S. Navy, just the Navy, has more aircraft than Russia. And they're more.
Yeah.
Like America
that is right.
The only reason why America can't do it is because America doesn't have the willpower of somebody like Putin. Like, if Putin was in charge of America and he went about doing that, he could actually win. Biden doesn't have the will to go to war with the world and win. So
I mean, maybe he might go to war with Corn Puff or whatever. Corn Pop.
Yeah.
General Corn Pop.
I'm of the view that the U.S. doesn't even have to do that. I think I've done a video on this called "It Only Takes a Few Purposeful Wars to Win the World." And in that, I basically say that if the U.S. just straight up nuked North Korea and then bombed Iran and took it out like in quick succession afterwards, it would be clear to all the other enemies in the world that the U.S. meant business, and they would beg to get on good terms and come around to be like Saudi Arabia, where they're allied dictatorships. And the ones that resisted would be wiped off the map, but they probably wouldn't resist. And as far as the big guys, Russia and China, go, you can bankrupt them. You don't actually even have to do war with them. All you have to do is drill oil, and Russia's done. And all you have to do is cut off China from trade, and they're done. And then you have the world for 100 billion years or more. So that's all it would take, and you never have a war again.
I don't know. I think this might be. You really are a Calvinist, aren't you?
Wait, how is this relevant to Calvinism? Like, I'm not. By the way, I'm not a Calvinist.
No, I know. I'm joking. I'm just saying. No.
I'm an agnostic atheist. But if I was going to become religious, I would be a hyper Calvinist Christian. So
no. I'm just saying that you're I'm being tongue in cheek when I said that, because the determinist, like the deterministic view of that you have.
I'm not a determinist. I'm with Bob Kagan on this. Bob Kagan says that if the West doesn't fight, like our lives depend on it, the enemies will win. Like the jungle will grow back. He makes it clear. He makes it clear when
deterministic, because if you say
good guys, the good guys being the good guys doesn't mean that they will win as if we're in a superhero movie. It's actually anti-determinist. It basically means that I believe that America is exceptional and the West is the best. But 100%, if Putin called our bluff and took us over and we didn't do anything about it, well, he would win history and we would lose, even though we were the good guys, and that would be that. So I don't believe that having morality on your side means that you win, because you have to like, it's basically you have to be the stronger party, and I want the moral party to be the strongest party, but it's strength that determines who wins.
So would you not say that it is determinist? Because I would argue that this is most certainly determinist, to suggest that, okay, so in this fight between the liberal West and the illiberal rest, the liberal West beats the illiberal rest.
No, but it's not. I'm not assuming that.
No. I'm just saying. No, you're not assuming that. I know you're not assuming that. But in the instance that happens,
let's say for the sake of argument,
no. I think you misunderstood what I was. That
Putin invades and Putin conquers the world, and now for 100 billion years, the world is the Russian Federation.
I heard that.
So what I'm saying is,
that's not what I was saying. I was saying that
no matter what, somebody's going to win the world. I'm just saying I want it to be us. I believe us to be the best. Yeah. I'm not saying that we're going to win just because we're the good guys. That's stupid. We need to fight like our lives depend on it.
Yeah, no, but the reason I'm saying that you sound somewhat determinist is because you say if the U.S. wins, then democracy will be forever. We will be at the end of history. Democracy will not.
No, it won't be the end of history. Like, I know what you mean going back to Fukuyama, but it would be dynamic and there would be ever greater prosperity and things would still happen and there would be different referendums and things. But
that's it won't never collapse.
That it would be a steady state. It would be a stable equilibrium. Why would anybody ever overthrow that? I mean,
I'm not saying overthrow that, but the thing is, the entire system could crumble from the inside because.
But it couldn't. That's an anti-democratic speculation. That's not actually based on any evidence.
It's more of a realist speculation.
No, but we haven't tried it. Like, if we played out this simulation and we ran it 100,000 times. And it played out this simulation where we have 100,000 simulations, and in each of those, we run the world from year 1 to year 100,000 with the United States in charge. In maybe a couple or a few of them, some sort of perturbation might screw things up and set about a moral decay and denialism in which people don't care anymore, and that could result in anarchy and chaos. But in all the rest, and now this is my speculation, but this is what I feel to be true, in all the rest, it would be a stable system. Some would be more prosperous than others, but the system would still exist. The capital would still exist. The state would still exist. And so, think about it. You wouldn't just have the world and now you're like, okay, we don't have to do anything anymore. You'd still have an education system that would glorify the founders. You'd still have people growing up admiring George Washington. They wouldn't just be taught, oh, well, we have the world now, so we don't have to care about our nation anymore. The nation would just be the world at that point, and everybody would have the same heroes and the same founding myths and whatnot. You know,
on that note, my ideal, like I mean, I like the sound of that in theory. However, I like the. Have you ever read the book? I think I've mentioned it before. Have you read Starship Troopers?
No, you did mention it before a while ago.
Yeah,
a week ago.
Yeah, that's my ideal society. Basically, sort of a world. Um, it's sort of like, but citizenship has to be earned because you have to prove that you actually have you're morally that you are
Well, didn't you say
basically
you have
morally
to
and
earn it by fighting? Is that correct?
no, not by fighting. Just
Okay.
that. So it's well, just because generally it's a pretty peaceful society for obvious reasons. It just so happens a war, like a war. Everyone's surprised to see a war break out with this bug race that comes into contact with the humans, and so they have to send the mobile infantry. But pretty peaceful society in that. It's just you have to be enlisted, I think, for like a certain amount of years, and then also if you don't want to join the military, there are other ways to do it to in. But basically, like you don't like you're not born with the right to vote, but you are born with the right to pursue suffrage. So in that, no matter who you are, and there was like a line in the book where it says, if you're like a crippled blind guy, we'll find you something to do, and you can have that opportunity. It's just like, again, this would probably make a good topic for one of my live streams in the future. But I wanted to get back to Russia real quick because that's been here
Yeah,
like 45
we'll
minutes.
wrap up the stream somewhat soon. I do have to go to bed fairly shortly, so we can get to the crux of your argument about Russia, though. So
Okay, so basically, there's a so the crux of this argument, this is from a book that was written in 1917, so right around the time, right after World War One, and it was around the time of the Russian Revolution, and so the whole idea is so basically everyone at that point saw Russia as a Western country. So, and this was only a small part of the book, but the book talks about so many things. There's 2 volumes. But so the author is a German historian, ended up talking about how everyone sees Russia as European right now. But the thing is, it's not actually European. It is its own civilization that is taking a false form, like a false Western form. And what he called this was a pseudomorphosis. Basically, a pseudomorphosis. It goes back to like the concept of a crystal. Like you'll have, if you find a like you find a rock or a crystal, and then sometimes if you break it open, there'll be a completely different crystal within there, and it was actually just forming inside the shell of another one, so it was taking a false form. So basically, it was arguing that's basically what Russia is. It's its own distinct society with its own distinct worldview, completely different from that of the West and from Europe. Um, so not a part of Western civilization at all, no connection whatsoever. But the thing is, ever since Peter the Great, basically started exporting all of these Western forms, architecture, clothing, and architecture. I forget if I said architecture, but architecture, which is what he calls the form language.
well, yeah, they have the aesthetics of Western
exactly.
under Peter the Great, but they have the institutions of the Mongol Empire.
So yeah, he never really mentioned the Mongol Empire, but that would be interesting to see if he would have something to say of that. But either way, I'd actually argue sort of a mix of the Mongol Empire with the Kievan Rus, because it was sort of like a mix. But basically, yeah, no, he actually said so. Russian civilization, or what he calls Slavonic civilization, because the entire point of so this book is like a book on the rise and fall of civilizations. Basically, says civilizations are like organisms. They have lifespans of about 2,000 years. They go through multiple phases. They go through a springtime phase, a summertime phase, an autumn phase, and a winter phase, which is basically you shouldn't look at history as sort of like a progressive line, but you should instead look at it within the context of individual cultures with their individual worldviews and art forms. I'm being very reductive describing this, but I know we don't have a lot of time. But I'm just basically summing up what his view of cultures are. So basically, cultures aren't some kind of like social construct or whatever. What they actually are is they're born. They're born, or as he says, a culture is born when a great soul awakens in the land. And so he was definitely, this author was inspired a lot by like Kant and Nietzsche and Goethe, especially Goethe, and then also like Heraclitus. So all these guys. But so yeah, with regards to Russia, so well, actually, going back to just real quick, my old boss, the libertarian I was telling you about, Vladimir, who was born in Leningrad back in the 80s. I was asking Vladimir about. Well, I actually asked him what he thought of the project thesis I did, and that this was the one from a few years ago I was telling you about. And he said he would disagree. He says Russia is basically on its way to being the first failed nuclear state. And what's interesting is, so in a way, that's going to make it more dangerous than anything. So that's going to make it another.
Well, Pakistan. I said to you before when you did bring this up. That
But I know that's not the point.
Pakistan is the first failed nuclear state.
Yeah. I know that, but like I'm going somewhere with this. So basically, but at the same time, I was doing some thinking. It's like, okay, but so again, what this author was saying was that, so sometimes a new civilization will form inside the shell of another civilization, and early on in its life, it will end up expressing itself using the dead forms of the previous civilization. So if you think about it, like the Middle East, sort of like during the after, like around the time of Rome, basically. So he argued that, like, for instance, Middle Eastern civilizations began around like the birth of Christ, for instance, modern Middle Eastern civilization as we know it, and it expressed itself using like Roman culture forms. So like their artwork, their architecture, sort of their metaphysical ideas and that sort of thing. But then once the classical world finally fell in the West, it was finally able to, Middle Eastern culture was finally able to break free and sort of create their own identity, and that happened in the form of Islam. So basically, that's what happens when a culture forms inside the dead husk of another culture. It will start to look like the previous culture, but eventually it will break out and become something distinct. So he argued that that's what Russia is right now. So he said that so every culture has a pre-culture phase, and that's about. So, for instance, an example of what he would say a pre-culture phase was, he said for the West, or for like Western, like European American civilization, it would have been the Dark Ages, and for the Greeks, it would have been like the times of the Trojan War, and he basically said the Trojan War was the ancient Greek, their equivalent of the Crusades, basically. Like that was like their founding event, where he said the founding event of the West, like the modern West, was basically the Crusades. So there's like all these analogous events in the lifespans of these different cultures. But so like the pre-culture phase for them would have been like the Mycenaean citadels and Crete and all that. And then for ancient India, it would have been like the Vedic period, with their like going around in their chariots with their horses and their sort of mountain fortresses. But so yeah, that's a pre-culture phase. And so what he argued is, so Russia, so not a European civilization, completely separate from European civilization. And what it is it's more or less the result of a gestation between what you said, the Mongols, I mean, to a lesser extent, the Mongols, what he said. I know you'd probably argue that the Mongols were more influential in shaping Russia than he would, but he did definitely mention them. But then he also said the Kievan Rus. So
the Kievan Rus was before the Mongol Empire. Most of Russia was under the control of Mongolia
but I'm talking about way back in like the 900s, 1000s, before the Mongols, because the Mongols didn't come till the 13th century. He said that
the Mongols really reshaped Russian society.
Yeah.
Because Russia, what we thought of as Russia, of course, the proto sort of Russian system, was essentially either conquered by or completely in tribute to the Golden Horde, essentially.
Yeah, so. Golden Horde. He mentions the Golden Horde in the book. It says they were really. He said basically, so the Russian pre-culture was the result of sort of an intermix between the Kievan Rus, who founded like Novgorod and Kiev and those cities in the Ukraine. So the Kievan Rus So Byzantine settlers, number 2, native wandering nomadic Slavs, and the Golden Horde. And so the pre-culture period of Russia, he said, started in the 14th century, around the time of the Black Death, because they had a very different aesthetic then. You see the very first czars, you see the Muscovy Duchy. They were like their distinct proto-culture at that point. So like they were in like a pre-medieval period, almost like their own ancient kind of period. But then what happened was, so they were starting to, so he describes it, so Russia, they started developing their own worldview distinct from us. So for instance, he says the European, basically the European worldview is one that is centered around progress, and one that is more or less focused upon the conquest of infinite space, because we're a very spatial people. Like he said, there's a reason why the West was the first civilization to colonize the world. There's a reason why the West was, so this is before he went to the moon, but today, if you were alive, he said, there's a reason why the West was the civilization that went to the moon, that went to space. Basically, he said it's about our goal, our like culture mission. We take it upon ourselves to conquer, basically to conquer infinity.
Disagree with that. You look at China, you look at Japan, you look at Korea, etc. They all had imperial ambitions.
No, they did. No, but listen. So China, though, however, China.
It's an essentialist argument which seems to break down the way that different people interpret the world between different, what you might call civilizations, or what we would think of today as different cultures or countries. And what it ultimately lends itself to is this narrative that, well, the West might be good, but it's only good if you're like in Europe. It's not right for China. It's not right for North.
That's not what he was saying. That's not what he was saying at all.
No, I know.
He said that China was in the midst of Western. Like he argued that China was going to be like basically.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is this idea that like, oh well, the Europeans they think about space and stuff, whereas these people over there they just
it's more complicated. More complicated than that.
Like,
I'm
no, come on. Like we all have the same human nature, right? So
yeah, he said that was basically the will to power. We do have that will to power, but we all express, but more or less we all have different ways of interpreting. It's more perennialist than essentialist.
So do Koreans. Like so does everybody.
But either way, so
yeah.
But either way, so with Russia, they were more as opposed to seeing the world as a in a spatial way. I mean, yeah, everybody sees like things in a spatial way, but then like there's sort of but different. Like everyone sees things similar, but
except this is from before pop psychology, basically.
Like, no, you need to know. I'm saying this is you're really reducing something that is
no. I don't want to get into the whole Dugin thing about how Russia is a different
Dugin. No, this has nothing to do with Dugin
lessons and stuff. It's like, look, I know we're running out of time. I'm totally fine with continuing the conversation at a later date. I find that these sorts of essentialist arguments and whatnot that really boil down to this idea that people are just different in different.
Well, that's not the point, Kevin. That's not the point that I'm trying to get to.
The main point that you're trying to get to, but I don't allow people to throw in snuck narratives that undermine Western hegemony, basically, and that's the problem. Is that we're all humans. We all starve if we don't have access to food. So the West is the best, and that's true regardless of where you are in the world, and the West should be everywhere.
He was saying that the West by 2000 is going to be everywhere, because that's basically that was I don't want to use the word destiny, but that was basically what its purpose was intended to be, to basically conquer the world.
Well, so was Japan. So was Germany.
Yeah, no, but they said no, but like for instance, there's a reason that Japan never actually ended up doing it.
They tried. They got really close to conquering Asia.
But either way, so Russia was on its way to sort of becoming its own independent culture until Peter the Great came along. Peter the Great ended up completely the Petronization. So he completely ended up westernizing it, and so that ended up putting sort of a false form over Russia.
He
And
didn't
so that
he didn't completely westernize anything. He had some architecture that looked European, and he changed some of the stuff to be a bit more
because he couldn't truly westernize. Yeah, he couldn't ever truly westernize it. He tried, but the thing is,
their government system, even after Peter, was still so greatly imbued by the essence of Mongolia and whatnot, and moreover by this long run understanding of autocracy.
This is exactly what I'm saying. Exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah,
because the thing is, it was a Western overlay, a Western aesthetic. It was basically trying to trick people into thinking that it was but that was not an expression of its true self. It was
no, there is no true self per se. It's just that there's an ingrained backwater that existed in Russia that Peter, to his credit, by the way, did try to overturn, because Europe was more progressive. Europe definitely was better. And he recognized that. He was actually, look, he was a dictator. I understand. He killed a lot of people. He butchered a lot of people.
I wouldn't call him a dictator. I'd call him an enlightened autocrat.
We'll call him a dictator, but he was enlightened by the definition of the early Enlightenment. And the thing about Peter is that I think, as far as autocrats go, I consider him to be a net positive for Russia. I think that what he did and his objective was, he saw the success of the West and he said, look at us. We can't compete with that. We need to modernize. We need to catch up. And you know what? A later, of course, manifestation of that was Khrushchev. It was also Stalin. Both of them were adamant on catching up to Western industrial.
Yeah, it's like, and so this is so part of the argument that he's making. He says, so in Russia, because there's sort of this strange sort of sense of cultural confusion. Like, what are we? Are we fundamentally Russian? Are we Slavic? Or are we European? And so that really began with Peter the Great. And then
Slavic, let's just be clear here. There are people out there that would call themselves pan-Slavs and whatnot. A lot of that is just a euphemism for Russian hegemony. Like, a lot of people, especially in Russia, think of Slavs as well.
Can I actually finish? Can I actually finish just explaining basically what I am, because I feel like we're going off onto completely different tangents at this point. But so there's sort of like a cultural identity crisis. Some of them are like, okay, we have this sort of native Russian cult. Are we Russian, or is Russia part of the West? And so there's been that sort of dialectic in Russia for the past couple hundred years. And the thing is, but Russia, due to Peter the Great, has sort of expressed itself using Western forms. So, for instance, you had the Russian Tsardom, like you said, was inspired by Mongolian institutions, but at the same time, the aesthetic, the exterior, it was like a European style ancien regime. So that's what it looked like on the surface. So it was almost like its true self was being masked by this European overlay. And that's what Russia more or less has been fighting to break out of for the past, 200 years or so. And so basically what's interesting, and so this was 100 years ago when this book was written, and it's scary how much it actually managed to get right in its predictions. It predicted the world wars, predicted basically modern technology and the effects that it would have. I'm not going to get into that. That's a completely different conversation. Also predicted the sort of the concentration of executive power in the United States. The only thing that he really got wrong was that he completely overlooked the United States as a potential superpower. He didn't think it had a future.
Well, so that was the most cringe oversight right there.
Yeah. No, but so yeah, definitely, because basically he's like saying, so every society, more or less, societies, they'll not to say that every society will have its Greece, every society will have its Rome, because it's not as simple as that. But you'll have different countries or different groups of people that more or less fulfill the same role as sort of previous. So history does not repeat itself, but history sort of plays out in a similar fashion, very similar to, again, like the human aging process. But either way, so with regards to Russia, he argued, has actually been a distinct civilization since around 1600 or so. In the 14 and 1500s, that was their sort of like pre-culture phase with the like Muscovy and Ivan the Terrible, all those guys. Or I think he said 1500s when it started, and then before that was the pre-culture. But either way, so Russia has more or less looked like it's been lumped in, culturally speaking, with the West for the past 500 years. But in reality, if you take a look at their literature and their art, on this, they might be taking the form of, for instance, books, like Russian books. For instance, the novel is, I mean, you could argue the novel started in Japan because in a sense it did, different kind of novel, but it's a Western art form, more or less. The novel, like tradition, like originally that's where it began as a, especially with back Don Quixote back in the 1400s. But so basically, in order to express their in order to express itself creatively, so you had the Russians who were adopting all these different European art forms, such as the novel. However, read a Russian novel and then read a Western European novel. Completely different. Yeah, they're both novels, but the thing is just not only the themes, but also sort of the way in which they're written. The prose is unlike anything that you'll see in Western Europe. However, there are variants between that, because you have some Russian novels that are fundamentally, and this kind of goes back to that sort of confusion, that dialectic in Russia. You have some Russian novels that come out or that have been produced that read like European books. And then you have some that come out that read like there's something, like they're in a strange league of their own, almost intuitive in a sense, almost like that they derive from some sort of like spiritual source in a sense to sound. I know I'm getting a little. I don't like the verbiage I'm using, but that's really the best way I could describe it. But for instance, compare Tolstoy to Dostoevsky. They were both Russian authors, yet their worldviews were incredibly different. Just if you read their nonfiction too, it's like you would never guess that they're from the same country, because Tolstoy had a fundamentally European view of looking at the world. Dostoevsky, pure Russian, 100% Russian. And from an artistic perspective, so in this book, he was talking about how.
Yeah, I will say though, I got to go to bed now. I'm good with continuing this at a later date.
Okay.
I'll give you a chance to make closing remarks beforehand. I did just want to say though, before we go off air, I am aware that just the other day you did do a stream in which for about 40 minutes or so, it was a complete slander that was issued against a friend of mine. I just want to get clear.
I ended up editing all of that out.
That you disavow the slander that was laid against my friend Spooky Nookies or Reese. Just so we're clear on the record, that you don't condone, because to my watching that, I don't recall you particularly issuing any slander.
No, because I knew nothing about that in particular, but
because I'm aware that your platform did play host to severe slander against a friend of mine, accusing him of being a child predator, and it went unchallenged. I just want to get clear on the record here that you disavow and condemn that slanderous accusation.
I disavow any slander that is on my channel.
Okay, wonderful. I just want that for the record here, because it was gross, and I think a lot.
I didn't even know they were going to be talking about that. Like, I mean, personally, I don't know him, so I don't know enough about the situation to really pick a side in that issue. But I ended up editing that out. It was I was not expecting them to go in that sort of detail. That kind of took me off guard, and at that point I just kind of tuned out.
Yeah, because it was brought to my attention later that slander had occurred there. I went to go and check it out, and again, granted, you don't know the details of the situation or anything and whatnot. It did seem to be, to me, as well as a lot of other people that watched it, that you didn't challenge their slanderous accusations. You were just kind of like, oh, wow, and everything. And I get it. You're a new host and everything here. It's just want to get clear for the record going forward that kind of slander we condemn, disavow, and won't tolerate going forward. Just so we can get on the same page.
Yeah.
Okay.
Normally, the reason I didn't really like the whole thing, this entire drama, like that whole thing. I was not expecting to get.
It's also illegal what they said about Reese because they had no evidence to support it. Right? It's actual slander, like in the legal sense of that.
Reese, is that the same person?
You can bring them, yeah. Like Reese could definitely, if he chose to pursue that route. I mean, I'm sure he could consider getting an attorney and everything about it. I just want to get it clear. I know that stream is down now. I get that.
Well, I privated it, and I'm going to edit that out.
Okay. Yeah, because I actually privated the debate in which that occurred. I'm actually going to be re-uploading it in which that portion is gone because we don't tolerate that. I consider that entire thing, as do a lot of people, to be completely and entirely unacceptable. And if it continues, there will be essentially there will inevitably. Now, I'm not representing Reese or anything. I'm not a lawyer or anything, but I'm just saying that there's the chance that there could actually be legal consequences that come about as a result of it. So I just want to get clear about
as long as you leave me out of that, because I'm
no, because you're the platform playing host to it, and it depends the extent to which you encourage it or don't question it or partake in it. That's the issue at hand, right?
I mean, I definitely don't encourage. That was the first time I was hearing about any of that. So okay. I mean, the thing is, like with me, like what I find hilarious, and I was talking with them on the stream too, and they actually apologized to me before that because it was really Coronis who kind of dragged me into this whole thing. Like I was like asked to like moderate the debate, and then after that, I ended up getting completely dragged in to all of this drama that I like never wanted to be a part of at all. And
I get that. It sucks to be in your position. However,
it's just not something I want
to happen. It's like that's what happens when you're involved with people that make those kinds of remarks and it goes unquestioned. It
wasn't even about that. Like even before that, I was already getting I had been getting dragged into that for like 2 days before that, and I kept telling them to stop, to shut up. And I was like, okay, let's just have an analysis stream, and then we'll be done. And then they started talking about stuff like I don't even know who all of it. It's like Game of Thrones. It's basically like somebody jumping into Game of Thrones in like season 3. It's like, who the fuck are all these characters that they're mentioning? Who's Spooky Nookies? Who's Reese? Who's Mr. Dapperton? It's like, yeah. So I basically they were. It was like they were way ahead. I was jumping into.
I get that, but I'm just telling you, going forward, if you are going to pursue a career on YouTube and in terms of your Discord community and everything, this won't be the last time that you find yourself caught in that sort of thing. Especially if you're playing host to many different sides of the political aisle, as your channel seeks to do. Mm-hmm. My advice to you, Mr. Politicrat, would be that going forward, when allegations that are as serious as those are levied against somebody, if you have no knowledge of that, it's not exactly sufficient to just say, oh, well, I'm not aware of this or whatever, but please continue making these sorts of things, because now all of a sudden your channel is now playing host to slander against, somebody, in this case happens to be a public figure and everything. It's inevitably then going to come back on you, whether you want it to or not. That's why you need to say, look, this isn't the place for that. We're here to talk politics, that sort of thing. Likewise, even in your private servers, like we have a policy in my private group, for example. I actually kicked somebody from my private chat today, the Hot Gang, kick them because they use the N-word. Like, we just straight up, even though it's a private chat and it's not public or anything, we just have a zero tolerance policy, for example. Like, you get kicked. Like, you could literally be a friend of mine for 10 years. I'm kicking you permanently.
I kicked MMI out once.
Okay.
I brought him back eventually. This was like a while ago because of the stuff he was saying to Volt. You see, so it's like I was like saying this. I think I said in the stream the other night. I've only ever like said the N-word twice in my life, and one of them was typed out, and that was like in the bot chat the other night. But either way, so in my server though,
but
yeah, in my server though, so I tolerate.
It inevitably comes about. That's the problem.
But I was saying in my server though. So I'll allow people to say certain that, like, I'm still trying to figure out. My server's still small, so I'm still trying to figure out really what I want the rules to be, because I don't want to be like super stringent, but at the same time I don't want it to be like,
you don't want to be known as a place where people can go if they want to drop N-bombs.
Yeah,
you're only
exactly. Like, so I'm not gonna like as it stands right now, I'm not gonna call somebody out just for like randomly dropping it. However, if they say it targeted towards somebody as an insult, I definitely discourage that kind of language. But like
my groups, if you use the N-word, for example, and it's not like a free speech thing. It's like I have like freedom of speech. You don't have a First Amendment right to be in my group chat. So
yeah,
that's the deal. So
yeah, but yeah. Anyway, thanks for letting me know, because like, especially with the like, again, this being a platform, I never really considered that. So
yeah, and Catholic notes, we also ban doxers too. Like, we have a zero tolerance policy on basically racial epithets and doxing. Those are like our some of the big ones there that we just don't tolerate anymore, because again, and as you grow, you'll find that if you don't take a firm stance early on, then people are basically going to see you the same way that I see Switzerland, where it's like, oh, they hang out with North Korea. It's like, they also hang out with America, but they hang out with North Korea. It's like that. That's
dude, I know, like, Switzerland's such a slut.
Well, that's the thing. You don't want to be that. You don't want to be the Discord version of that. You want to have a zero tolerance policy on racists and that kind of thing. So
yeah,
because it's in your best interest in the long run. Like, I know it might not seem like it right now because I'm kind of calling you out. I'm actually giving you advice if you want to be successful going forward. You know, so
yeah, like, I mean, so I think that the closest thing, so like on my stream, I've never had a like a white nationalist on my, I definitely would never have a white nationalist on my stream. The closest thing I've ever had was a clerical fascist, but I don't think I'd go any farther than that.
Well, I wouldn't even be opposed to the idea of having a white nationalist on the stream necessarily. It just depends.
Well, okay, when I should have said outright Nazi.
And if you're how you're going to approach their white nationalism. I'm not saying don't have anybody on like that, but if they come on your stream and they're just dropping N-bombs and all this kind of stuff and everything, it's
no, I do not allow that on my streams.
Yeah, you don't have to tolerate.
I mean, I'm fine with like cursing here and there, but like definitely not. And also, nobody's allowed to say the word retarded either. The only one who's able to say retarded is Alkazai, because that's like his word.
Okay.
I don't know. You know, like, yeah, that's his favorite word. It's really strange. But either way, pessimistic Titan. But either way, with regard, I guess we can finish this conversation sometimes, because eventually he does get into a prediction about how he thinks within 500 years Russia is going to be the world's superpower.
500 years, the world's going to be the United States.
Well, this was well, he said this like 100 years ago, because the his whole thing, basically, culturally speaking, I don't mean the West. I don't mean the West is a political entity.
Yeah,
the West is a political entity, is going to be here for a while.
Wrap this up. I've got to go to bed. I got to be up early for work, but it's been good having you on, and we'll talk to you again in the future. And I will give you the time here to make any sort of closing remarks as to where people can find you, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm the Politicrat. Follow me on Twitter at the Politicrat. However, my original account, because I had two Twitter accounts before this. First one, I got banned because I called Charlie Kirk a retard. And the second one got banned is because I insulted the Chinese foreign minister by calling him Mushu. So yeah, but so now instead of the Politicrat, it's the PO capital I lowercase I TICRAT. So instead of a lowercase L, it's a capital I because I'm smart. But yeah, so anyway, follow me on Twitter, and then also follow me on YouTube. Also, the Politicrat. So
well, there you go. And so everybody, if you appreciate these streams, I do daily streams and daily premieres. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for daily content. You can also follow me over on Twitch, Facebook, Minds, Gab, and Twitter, and all of the links are in the description below. Additionally, if you want to support what I do, you can check out my Ko-Fi, my PayPal, as well as my Patreon. And with that, I will see you in the next video. Have a good night, everybody. Stay big.